Hey, everybody. Thanks for jumping in today on this episode of Shift and today's Shift interview. My interview today is with John Busch. John is a good friend of mine. He is a family man, a father, an entrepreneur, and he is the founder of an organization that I am proud to be a partner in and a mentor with called Real Men. You've been hearing me talk about it all week, and we're going to continue to talk about it because I think the community that's being developed there is really important and it's really valuable. And I think that it's also important that as men in this space in 2021, we talk about vulnerability, we talk about accountability. And I think it's not just about being physically strong and mentally strong, but it's also about being wise. And a good part of wisdom comes from knowing that we don't know and being open to having hard conversations and hard dialogue. And one of the things that I love about John is that it isn't just the physical or the mental fortitude. There's compassion, there's kindness, there's vulnerability. And that's what I really think we need to be leaning into now more than ever. So I hope you enjoy the conversation today. We actually, this interview just jumps right in at in like almost mid thought because we were just kind of riffing before I was going to intentionally start the interview, and I hit record. And where we're at is any place to start. So we're just going to jump right in. Hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to hearing any of your thoughts or feedback. And thank you so much for being a part of this movement.
It is it's like a daily, not just accountability, but it's a daily check-in where I know that all these eyeballs are just kind of on me all day long. It's like
Hmm.
18 eyeballs. So like that's a lot of people looking at like your every move, and not just what you
Yeah.
say, because they're only going to listen to a fragment of that, but what you do. Like, is dad full of crap, or is he actually moving forward with what he told us, or is he just, a big hypocrite and
Yeah.
doing other stuff and telling us we can't have ice cream, then he's over there pounding the carton behind the fridge like we just
Yep.
taught him.
Yeah,
So
I shared with somebody earlier today. We were having a conversation, and it was like my kids. We were talking about our children and how they are the best accountability partners because they, at least in my house, I imagine it's the same in your house. They have no problem holding the mirror up and saying, "Hey, you said this,
yeah,
and you're doing this."
yeah.
And so, but did you guys set out to have nine? Was that planned? Unplanned? Like, because I mean,
I
I've shared my story before, so they know mine of how I ended up with eight. But I'm curious, like, when you guys got together and you started having kids, were you like, yes, big families rule, or like, how'd that come
no,
about?
no, big families are crazy. Like, it was, I grew up with one sister. Lauren has two brothers. So we were thinking, I don't know, maybe two, three, maybe four max, and then just go ahead and double that and add one more. Like, I'm like, I don't know. So, but we love, I could tell when Lauren had the babies, like I just knew, don't tell her no. Like, it kind of had these little little things of like, hey, don't tell her no to this other one. And I could see almost immediately after she delivered each child, I could see it in her face. Like, I call it the veil of forgetfulness. Like, she'd have this something wash over her where she just forgot. Like, her pregnancies are terrible. She just forgot the 9 months, all the puking, all the sickness, all the struggle that her body just went through to grow this baby. And that was just like wiped out. And then I'd see her get this look like holding this baby, and I'm like, oh man, we're not done. And like, we had that almost every time. And number eight, I was like, oh, that's different, right? So I was like, I think we're done. And then number nine was a total surprise, and we're so glad now. Of course, you can't like picture your life without him, and
Yeah.
he rounds us out. He's calm, he's chill, he's an amazing little dude. So plus it tips the scale in the favor of the men, which is always fun. So now we get five men to four girls. So
Yeah, no, I'm so outnumbered. I'm not even gonna try anymore because uh I've got six daughters and two sons. And now, and because of our age gaps, like we had our first two, and then we had a 7 year gap where we kind of went, we don't know how to be like we don't know how to be grown-ups, let alone parents. Like, we got to figure this out. So it's just me and my 14-year-old son at home, and then it's the wife and all six daughters. And so
I
it's
love
uh
it.
it's a different ballgame. But the thing, like you said, like you, and our situation was very similar, that Carrie was always kind of like, hey, because I like four babies in, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go have a vasectomy. Like, you're gonna do you, well, like, how do we stop this train?
Yeah.
And she was just always kind of like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And then with our 8th one, she went 43 weeks. And she was like, remind me in a year when that veil comes on
Yeah.
that this was miserable
Yep.
so that we don't go down this road again.
Yeah.
And we had some medical things that came up that presented for us where we were like, okay, yeah, we're done. This is it.
Yep.
And I know
Same.
you guys have had some challenges. So one of the things I really want to talk to you about, because I think a lot of guys don't dive into what it's like when you have a wife who has medical conditions or has in my case it's mostly anxiety, mental PTSD. We had about a year of recovery when Carrie had a stroke, but a lot of guys don't talk about what it's like to be not just the provider
Yeah.
in their home, but also the caregiver, and not just for the kids, but for your spouse. I'm curious how that's been for you and how you navigate that, because I think a lot of guys that end up in that space don't know how to talk about it, and they don't know that they have other men out there who've been through it or are open to talking about it.
Yeah, I'd love to chat on that. So the first thing comes to mind is like Lauren and I dating from high school all the way up, being married 17 years now. Like there's going to be a lot of forced growth in that time frame, right? You're basically going from adolescence to young adulthood to where you think you know everything, and then life humbles you, and then you're kind of growing into your 30s and kind of starting to figure some stuff out. You're like, maybe I'll really catch traction in my 40s. Like you just kind of keep learning and growing. There's a lot of forced growth. I feel like oh man, well, Lauren and I are both huge advocates for mental health, and I think that that is so powerful. It's such a blessing in a relationship to be able to really key in on and look out for your significant other. And I feel like that's reciprocated. The stronger that we look out for our partner, I feel like they give that back to us. Like it's immediately, and we don't do it because it's immediately gratifying. We do it because um, we love them, right? There's both a bond, and yes, this is what you're supposed to do, but make it bigger than that. Make it bigger than a responsibility, because it's exciting for me to look out for Lauren. I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, hey, mom and I, we're going to put God first. To me, mom comes second and you guys are third. And for the longest time, they were like, what? We're third? Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is how it has to go. Because if I can't watch out for your mom, she's going to be my priority. Mom's priority, she's going to watch out for you guys. But if nobody watches out for her, like that's my mission. Of course, I'm going to keep an eye on you guys and help as well. But we kind of have kept things for the most part in a really good balance with that. And it's allowed Lauren and I to have some really awesome growth opportunities to push through, because people talk about, I mean, having 8 or 9 kids, I think every woman goes through it, whether they realize it or not, but things like postpartum depression or all the hormones changes leading up to the delivery of a baby. Postpartum depression can show up for years after a
Yeah.
baby, let alone if
Yeah.
you're having multiple children, right? Like now you're just talking about compounding potential health scenarios. So the mental health struggle is a huge battle. And oftentimes, I know both you and I have had experiences with our wives where the physical health has shown up as well. So if you're getting in on
Yeah.
both avenues, and usually when the physical and the mental health shows up, there's usually going to be some challenges in the spiritual realm. Usually you're like, really, why me? Why? Like you
Yeah.
kind of get it from a lot of different avenues. So the communication for us, keeping that top of mind, front of mind, and coming up with and creating healthy ways to be able to share feelings. Hey, what you just said isn't sitting really well with me right now. Here's why. I don't know if it's triggering something from my past. I don't know if it's the way you said it.
Yeah.
I can tell you're a little bit upset, but like, man, how powerful is that? I know you and Carrie have a great communication skill set. And like that has saved so many awesome things just to be able to work through
Yeah.
that. And then questions, like communication and then questions are probably the two biggest nuggets that was like, take something away from this, man, learn how to communicate and share your feelings, and learn how to ask
Yeah.
questions, and don't settle for an answer when somebody says I'm fine, or don't like press it, like get into the details, because that's going to really let somebody know you care.
Yeah, it's funny you said that we have great communication, because her and I would tell most people that our communication sucks. Like we're constantly trying to figure it out. But the reason I think it shows up to other people is great is because we are communicating, even though we're fumbling through it, even though we're like, I don't know. I don't
That's why
know.
I
I
said it, John.
feel this. I'm struggling with this. Why did you say that? Like, or we'll like rehash what people said. And it's like, we're like, and Carrie says all the time, like, gosh, we just can't communicate. And I'm like, well, no, we can't solve anything,
Yeah.
but we're always communicate. Like and I think people have this idea that, you know, and like I'm an overthinker and Carrie's sort of like an underthinker. She just goes with like her gut and her feelings, and I'm like my strengths profile is, all strategy, and so I'm always trying to figure it all out, and I do that through talking through it. And she's like, I feel this way, that's good enough. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't work. Right. And then I love how you said, like, when they say they're fine, you got to lean in, because we had a scenario recently where, I could tell something was off. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? She's like, I'm fine. And then she like threw something across the room. And I was like, okay, so like that word and that action don't align.
Oh, I've learned that fine stands for frustrated, irritated, not engaged. I'm like,
Yeah.
fine is like the alarm should be sounding like
Yeah.
you're not okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, you're fine, but you're not okay. So like let's unpack some of that. And
Oh
I
yeah.
think, we're both fortunate that we have created for ourselves situations where time freedom, is something that we can lean into, because a lot of husbands and a lot of, nuclear families don't have that sort of time, or they don't feel like they have the time to like manage the emotional conversations that sometimes need to be had. And it's like, I don't know how to help fathers or men in general. Maybe you're not a dad yet,
Right.
but just navigating relationships where like the I'm fine and you're like, okay, good, I don't have to talk about it.
Mhm.
Like it's the worst possible solution. Like you're like making the time to have those conversations, and it doesn't mean you need to solve it, like Carrie and I had a conversation recently where she's processing through some stuff and I offered up some solutions. And under normal circumstances, those solutions would have been like welcomed and okay. And in
Yeah.
this situation, she was just like, nope, this is horrible. And I was like, okay, tell you what, you take the time to process through it, because you're not thinking clearly. Like, and I've been there too. Like, she'll offer me support, and I'm just like, no, they're an asshole. I don't care. I don't want to deal with it. And she's like, okay, so you need to just process through it. And when you're ready to talk,
Yep.
we'll talk. But that takes time.
It
And
does. It does. Well, and the time freedom thing is awesome, right? But where I feel like when the harder somebody works, I've had plenty of jobs that are 12 plus hour days and long hours, and I'm sure you've had to, like
mhm,
all the different things, shift work, just terrible, at a golf course, at oil refinery, like all these things where you don't control your schedule, you don't control your time. And I can tell you, looking back on those, the moments in those times where we didn't necessarily have more control over our schedule, the times that I chose to really dig in, like if you get home and you're working super, super hard and long hours, it's most likely going to keep you in a me mentality. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm not having sex enough with my wife. I'm me, like all this stuff that I want and I need. If you go home and look for two or three things that you can do to serve her and to serve your family, what I found is like all that other stuff shows up. So, and she feels more love and she feels more connected. So
yeah,
more likely the sex is going to happen, more like everything's going to flow better. So how anytime that I've felt stuck in my life, serving has gotten me out of so many pickles. So why do we not often think about serving our wife, serving our
yeah,
significant other in that way of like, you are tired and I'm willing to still show up and serve you and be here for you, because like it's not just what we do, but it's what we should be doing like
yeah,
regularly.
yeah. You're so right, man. And I mean, I think that's why we have such a connection, because for me, anytime that I get stuck, the way for me to get unstuck is I always kind of like, and I shared this in an episode recently, or comes out soon. I don't remember. I think it's this Thursday, and who knows when this one will air. But anyway, it's a tool on how I try to use to get unstuck, and it's evaluating sort of, for me, it's the four areas. But I want to talk. You guys kind of look at the five peaks, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. But it's like, where am I at in these places, and what is three actions I can do to move. Well, we'll take, my marriage. How do I move my marriage from a 5 to a 6?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What are 3 things that I can do? And inevitably it's, how do I submit to her? How to, and we, this pastor I like, he talks about it as a contest of submission.
Yeah.
Who, like, you want to win that contest, you want to serve her, and she should be working to serve you more, right? And it's not for ego's sake, but it's like
Yeah.
you said, like, if you serve them, then, like, because I really believe that you get what you give, right? And so if I'm giving off attitude and selfishness and, like, what about me, then that's what I'm going to get in return.
Yeah.
But if I give my spouse, like, everything, and it's not fair, like, in your head you're like, this isn't fair, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I should
Yep.
be getting what I want, right? And so, like, my kids all the time will be like, Dad, that's not really fair. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, the sooner you learn to embrace the unfairness that
Yeah.
exists, and you rise above it, the
Mm-hmm.
better off you're going to be. Like, it's so important. And I feel like uh so many men don't recognize their own ability to choose into loving people more.
Mm.
And I think if they could realize that, and that's why I do this podcast, that's why I love being a part of your group.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to talk about that. I also want to talk about, like, you talked about shift work, and you talked about working in the oil refinery and doing the different things. I'm wondering if, before we dive into, like, what you're doing now, you had this, like, major life event that sort of brought you a ton of clarity. I wonder if you'd share a little bit about that, because
For
I
sure.
think people who haven't had those kind of life experiences struggle to find that clarity.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, let me pre-clarify anything that I just said on, like, telling guys what to do. I'm always careful to be like, okay, well, if I feel like I'm kind of sort of speaking at anything, like, hey, here's how we should be taking care of our wife or showing up for her or anything else, like, guys, know that comes, if it sounds like it comes from a place of authority, know that comes from a place of doing a lot of stuff the wrong way to get to that place of feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is what it's really starting to look like, should look like, could look like. Yeah, no, there's a lot of struggle behind that. So yeah, my story, I raised in just an awesome, hardworking blue collar family, and always saw mom work hard. When my dad would get laid off from working, he worked at Boeing Helicopters for 20 plus years. Then he bounced around different jobs, HVAC technician. He worked in an oil refinery as a boiler maker, and usually something in the maintenance realm, right? So he's always working hard, always working with his hands. So I saw that when he'd get laid off from Boeing, has happened from time to time with unions and strikes and things. My mom would clean houses. Like, so I always, this work ethic was great and really instilled in me at an early age that I didn't have any plans past high school to do anything. Like, I was like, I'm just going to go work like my dad, and pretty much that's it. Like, luckily stumbled into this path of a trade school, and that was kind of a cool opportunity to get into something. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can probably tolerate a couple hours of school a day if you're going to let me work in the afternoon and teach me something along the line. So that was cool. I got an opportunity to get a full ride scholarship to Williamson Trade School. It's a really good trade school in the country. One of the top. They produce some really, really good guys in brick masonry and power plant, machine shop, all kinds of cool stuff. And it was neat to get in there. And for me, I went for horticulture, landscaping, and turf management. So I started my track working in a golf course, worked at a private country club for a handful of years, and purely for a money move, because we had 2 going on 3 kids at the time. I was able to double my salary overnight by taking this job at an oil refinery. So for me, it was like, I'm working 25 plus days a month and making like 30 grand. And that's really, really hard to support this family of 4, almost 5. Like, so when they were talking about a base salary close to 60 plus overtime opportunities, I was like, I don't care what my degree's in, right? It was purely a money move. And they're like, oh, you'll work 14 to 17 days a month. I'm like, are you kidding me? I work half the month and make double the money. Like, what's the catch, right?
It's an
What's the
easy
catch?
equation, right?
So I said yes, because I thought I was genius, but there was a catch, because 12-hour swing shift messes you up. It was terrible. Like 4 a.m., 4 p.m., or 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. Like, those shifts were terrible. People are not meant to operate on those kinds of cycles. It goes against
Yeah.
everything that, like, our biological state and wants us to do. Not to mention dealing with stuff that is highly explosive, right? Diesel fuel, jet fuel, gasoline, all these other vapors, and like terrible, terrible stuff. Not to mention like all the carcinogenic stuff that comes out of that, all the cancer causing stuff, terrible stuff. So I was there, a total of 6 years, a little over 6 years before they shut the plant down. But the reason they shut the plant down is because a few years prior, I was working one night and had just this really, really terrible experience. I was there on shift work, and this was after midnight. So everybody's in bed, can't talk to the family. And we just heard the doors rattle. And I'm there with one of these older guys, and he's in his 60s, and he's telling me, hey, we need to go out and start circling the unit. And I'm like, well, that's weird. He was like, either that, those doors are only going to rattle if there was like, right when there's an explosion, there's a like a suction of air, right? A rush of air to somewhere else. He was like, I don't see any thunderstorms. There's nothing on the radar. He's like, our unit's fine. Somewhere just had an explosion. I'm like, what? Like, we didn't hear anything. And I'm a few hundred yards away from where this went down. Well, that night, it turned out that there was a weak spot in a 400-pound hydrogen line that found an ignition point. And in an oil refinery, you're constantly heating and cooling and doing different things. These heaters, open air heaters, have flames underneath of them, the pilot light that keeps everything lit. So what happened is this line starts to form a vapor cloud and finds this open ignition source underneath of a heater, and you get an explosion. Well, I learned that night in an oil refinery, fire is good. Like, you want stuff to burn because you're flashing off and burning off whatever's continuing until you can isolate that pipe. Okay. The bigger the vapor cloud, the bigger the explosion. And I was like, this goes against everything I've ever thought. Like all the rules.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right?
No, not stop, drop, and roll. It's like, no, you freaking run and you're turning valves. And so it was insane, an insane couple of hours, because we went outside and our fears were confirmed that there's a few huge fireballs just going off in the yard. And I could feel the heat, like it was right next to me, and I'm probably 200 yards away. So we're holing up, all of us together, like in this blockhouse. We go in, our job is to isolate our existing unit. We have emergency protocols. We practice them often, right? Just like an airline pilot or different things. So we know exactly what to do. There's valves that we can slam from inside the control room so we stay safe, but other things that you need to go out and secure. So I was an outside guy, so my job was to go out, run around, and secure stuff. The unit that this stuff blew up on was one of the last in the country. It was an ethylene oxide unit. And the government way back in the day used to use this stuff for bombs to drop from the airplanes. And the reason is because when you mix those two chemicals together, there's a 7-mile blast radius.
Wow.
So one of the reasons that this was the last unit like this in the country is because all the other ones had blown up. So
that's reassuring.
A really big issue that night, because when these vessels overpressure, which happens in an emergency situation, they typically will have a safety that will release and put whatever that chemical is to the atmosphere. So if you've got an existing fire and now you're going to dump basically this other highly explosive chemical right into it. So there was a couple of heroes that night that went in and literally risked their own lives to save the rest of the yard, save the rest of the town. I mean, my parents lived 3 miles away from the refinery. So like the night was terrible, and I'll never forget it because I prayed more that night than I have in a very, very, very like any year leading up to that. So I had some cool conversations with God to be like, really, this is my life. I'm in my early 20s, making decent money, trying to take care of my family. And this is how I'm going to go out. Like this big explosion in an oil refinery. And I'm going to go out here with my coworkers, not surrounded by my family, people that I love, like not getting a last word to my wife. And I called her and left her a message that night that I was glad she didn't answer the phone. But the message is like, tell the kids I love them. I love you. Raise them the way that we would. Like, I did not know if I would see her again. Things were, the radio has always got chatter on. The radio was like super, super silent, nobody talking. So I'm like, oh man, people are freaking out. They don't know if this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So super scary to have to place a phone call like that and think about what I call like your legacy in your early 20s. Yeah. What the heck has my life done? What has it been worth to date? And yes, I had an awesome wife and a couple of kids. I'm trying to be a good dad, but like, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot. So I made a promise with God that night. I'm like, bring me through this, and I will dedicate my life to whatever growth experiences I need to go through, whatever it is that I need to handle and work through and push through. so that I can grow into a person that can continue to be not just a conduit and a vehicle, but really bless other people's lives and show other
Yeah.
people that like you can do hard stuff, you can push through. So obviously survived that night, but man, the connection that you get to God when you have a moment like that, and I don't wish that moment on anybody, but I am grateful for it often.
Yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity to kind of reflect on it and share there. But man, it was 13 fire trucks called to the scene. Like we did not think for many, many hours that we were walking out of there
You're
that
gonna
night.
walk away. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
terrible.
yeah, I mean, there's just so much in that, like the the experience to be brought face to face with your own mortality, right? And you talk about legacy, and I know that weighs heavy for both of us, not just because we have a lot of kids. I think that plays into it to some degree. Um, and I've not had that life threatening experience necessarily. But I've always been since that time, I'm curious, like, because like you said, you had this conversation with God, like, pull me through this and I'm gonna make it worth it, right? Like I'm gonna live each day with purpose. And I have had a similar experience, and I'm curious, and I think since that happened for me, I mean, I'm 47 and I was probably 33-ish when that happened for me. And I've always sort of struggled with how to get people into that mental space without bringing them to death's door, because it's almost like you gotta live through it to really, really understand what it's like to go, I almost lost it all,
Yeah.
and so I live, and my wife had a near death experience, and she actually struggles with, for me, like, it was just the exclamation point of my own experience, like, of just how fragile we are as humans.
Yeah.
And I really want to make the most of every day. And I often get frustrated with her. And I wonder if you experience this too, because I'm like, you're here. Like, how are you not happy? How are you not? How,
Yeah.
like, how do you have anxiety? Like, you shouldn't even be here right now. Like, and it's unfair of me, and I get mad at myself because I'm like, well, I'm not going through what she's been through. But like, when you reflect back on your experience, and then like you have the need to care for your wife, do you get into that headspace at all? And like, what is that like for you?
The biggest gift, as I've reflected on that, the biggest gift that I got from that night was the opportunity. I don't want to say that I saw my future, but I was given this gift of like what I'm calling your default future. I don't know what else to call it. Run my life out. That moment where you ask yourself, like, really, is this
Mm,
all my life is worth? Like, is this what I'm meant for? And I got these little glimpses of like 10, 20, 30 years down the road, what my life would be like, would continue to be like, would be like if I stayed on the path that I was on in that moment, right? If I made it through that night and I did nothing, I didn't honor my part of the promise, I didn't change, I didn't do anything else, what that life would be like. So my challenge to people would be, wherever you are right now, if that is not where you want to be, then run it out 10, 20, 30 years and see what that looks like. Because now what you've got is fuel and motivation that you can use to help navigate on a different path, because it's going to be tough, it's going to be hard, and there's going to be days where you're going to be human and get frustrated and angry and feel depressed, and sad, and like you're failing, right? Especially trying something new and doing the hard stuff. So that little reminder for me is, no, you chose a different path, it was for a reason, you chose not to stick with that default future. And I can tell you there have been many, many suck days and hard days and difficult things since that night. The promise wasn't that it was going to be easy for me. The promise was that I would do my part and he would bring me through that night. Maybe I should have been a little bit more specific, like, I don't know, down to the cars and the house and where we wanted to live. Like,
right,
I
right.
don't know, but I was just like, let me live. Right. So, but I feel like that was enough, because there's so many things that I feel like God has in store for us to learn and grow, and it's not his role to impose his will on us. It's ours to learn and to get that knowledge and that learning and pass it on to our children, so each generation can progress. So wherever you are, and that's one of my favorite conversations to have with people, if you want to change anything, run it out, and that is your default future. And if that isn't showing up for your health, for you financially, for your whole family, like the way that you want to, then you have to keep that feeling
Mm.
close to your heart. And then that's your fuel, that's your fire. Let that be your fuel for change. So that should light you up. And if it doesn't, it might piss you off, it might make whatever the feeling is, Keith. Like there's no wrong feeling there. It might be
Yeah.
depression, it might be anger, it might be, that's your fuel though. Like let that feed the change. And for me, that has served so well to do the things that are scary and feel like I shouldn't do. And coming from a long line of blue collar workers, like I've now had, I don't know, gosh, 8 companies, like most of which have failed, like, but I've tried and I'm still here. And
Yeah.
most of the day with my wife, that's the message. Like, hey, I'm still screwing up. Remember, I'm still learning too, but I'm still here. Like, just know that my message is I'm here and I'll continue to be here for you. And I'm sorry I was an idiot today, but we'll see how tomorrow goes. Like, I'm still going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that phrase, run it out. Because I think there's a ton of value in thinking that through. And it takes a little bit of, it touches on both of the kind of primary arcing themes of my podcast, which is vulnerability and accountability. Because you have to be vulnerable enough to work through the scenarios. And a lot of times what we say to other people, we're sugarcoating or we're justifying behaviors, but we know that when we're having those conversations with ourselves, we know what's real.
Yeah.
We know if we're taking it, what a friend of mine calls is wrestling it to the ground. Like, I want to take this idea and I want to wrestle it to the ground. It's like, where is this going to take me? What is this going to do? How is this going to benefit? But I like the idea of looking at, like, what does this look like 5, 10, 15 years down the road? Because a lot of times we can then go, okay, I don't want to put my energy into this. And that's actually why I hadn't thought of it in that context, but that's how I ended up coming to the decision to join my wife in her business. Because I was a freelance designer and I was doing my own thing. And it was like, I was looking at, she had some certain things that she wanted us to do, and I wasn't clear on it, and it was scary for me and it was different. But when I looked at what I was doing and what that looked like 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and how much time and energy it would put in, and what it would look like to build a clientele and then have to keep chasing clients and all of that, versus what we were doing and creating some sort of passive income that still requires work, still requires engagement and energy. It was like, okay, well, 5 years from now in this business, this is where I'm at. Or 5 years from now in this business, this is where I'm at. Which one makes the most sense? And I had to really put my ego aside, because it was her idea. She had started it. I wasn't the genius in the family. Like, so I love that because that's very succinct. It's a very easy way to say, okay, yeah, I love that idea. Run it out. What's that look like?
Yeah. And it should. I mean, my hope is that it scares the hell out of people, because that did me. And I
Yeah,
was
it
like,
should.
what is, yeah. And then you've got your answer. But like, okay, you've just confirmed to yourself that if you continue on this path, your future is going to be what you just saw. It's going to be scary.
Yeah.
It's going to be filled with, I mean, goodness gracious, I was sampling stuff that is known carcinogens like twice a shift. Like, I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, for sure, I would have gotten cancer. Like, I run out the health. I would have been okay, maybe financially okay, but probably divorced. Like, shift work just does a terrible number on family life and everything. Like, what do I want for my kids? Like, every part of it scared the hell out of me. So I was like, there's no way. Like, I don't know what's on the other side of door number 2, but we're going there.
Yeah, but it's not this. Like, I read this great book, kind of shifting gears, but it in regards to homeschooling, and he writes about, this is what school does, this is what teachers do, and this is coming from a New York State Teacher of the Year.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was like, someone who wasn't in the game, like they were in the middle of it, coming upon retirement, looking back and going, and he actually wrote this book called Dumbing Us Down, And he said in the forward, I think it's in the forward of the book, where he said, I wrote this book because I was tired of hurting children for a living.
Wow.
Whew. For you to be reflecting back on your career and realizing, and so he spent the rest of his life helping people understand why, you know, public education maybe isn't the best. And he presents in this
Yeah.
book, and it was the reason we chose to homeschool, because Carrie was really pushing on it, and I was like, they need grades, they need structure, they need discipline, they need all these things, because I was raised that my dad was a cop. He was, like that was his mentality, like
Yep.
structure, discipline, rules. And he said, he laid out all the evidence, and then he said, no, based on everything that we've shown to be factual, there's kind of only two scenarios. One is that all the money in the world and all the smartest people in the world aren't going to fix public education. Or two, public education is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The end result of both of those is not healthy or positive or good for your children. And so now you decide what to do. It was like, well, shit. Okay. Now that I know, it's like, Maya Angelou says, if you know better, you do better. So it's like, well, now that I know all
Yep.
this information, what do I do with that? And so many people will know it, and they'll make choices that don't align with what they want because they're scared. They don't know how. I mean, I had no clue how to do this thing with my kids. And I know you guys have run the gamut of, like, you've homeschooled some, you've public schooled some, you've private schooled, you've done co-ops, like, and there's a ton of bravery, I think, in being able to say, this is right for this kid, this is better for this kid, and humbling yourself and managing that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, sort of on how you show up as a parent in that respect. Um, now that you have this, like, legacy that you're destined to, like, build up.
Hmm. So, just in regards to schooling specifically, or just more parent from the parenting
Just
side?
from the parent aspect, because, like, you got a bunch of kids, man, and it's funny to me because people always think about, like, you know, parents feel like their children are theirs to raise,
Yeah, yeah.
and I feel like my kids are mine to love, care for, and protect.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure who's raising who.
Yeah.
Like, I've learned so much from them,
Yep.
and it's a constant thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the answer would definitely tie faith into it. So I love your, clarification on it there, because it's a super spiritual journey to have and raise children that I feel like, have a really hard time comprehending if you don't have kids. It's just, you can have conversations with people and be like, yeah, I love kids, they're great. Like, until you have, and you have cried with them and struggled and, nursed them through different things and difficult things, and especially gone through all the different things from toddler to teenage, you've got the adult children now, like, it's a blessing, right? So we are in families for a very specific reason, and I feel like that is oftentimes, the biggest gift, the biggest purpose of what we have in this life. And the reason that that kind of gets confirmed for me is because when I look at the world, and I look at what the world most directly often tries to just break down, divide, conquer, it is most often the family. And I'm like, man, so if this is one of God's greatest creations, and he was like, no, 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 I'm gonna not just gonna create man and woman, like, we're gonna then go forward, multiply, replenish, and here you're gonna, like, raise them up. Super powerful to recognize the blessing that comes from being in a family. It's supposed to be learning, it's supposed to be messy, it's not supposed to be perfect. So once you kind of come to grips with that, it's okay to not absolutely nail everything every day and be perfect. It's a little bit easier to kind of roll with it, keep growing, and just really let your journey be unique. So yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah. No, I love that. I think protecting the family is huge, and it's really been a guiding light for why we as parents have made a lot of decisions that we've made, even early on, before I feel like I had really dived into personal development, growth, even before I even understood why I was doing it. Because, like, when we had kids, I was in the restaurant business and Carrie was an esthetician. So she worked days and I worked nights
Yeah.
on purpose so that I had the kids during the day. She had the kids at night. And they didn't go into daycare and they didn't go in. And that means we didn't see each other for like 2.5 years. Like, we just we didn't have family vacations. We didn't have a lot of those things that other families did because it was like, we're going to protect this thing. And even now, like, now, circling back, like I tell my kids all the time, like my wife comes first. I'm like, I love you guys, like you're my kids, but she chose to be with me and I chose to be with her. And like the best thing I can do for my children is to honor their mother and to show up for her and to
Yeah.
put her first. So I love that you brought that up because I agree with that. And I don't think it breaks my heart. Like I recognize that like divorce is a thing and relationships don't work out and that it does take two. And I know a lot of people who get divorced who, maybe it's one person or the other who's really driving that decision. The other one's trying to save it. What breaks my heart the most though is when I see divorce like celebrated. Like even if you're the one who wants to move on into a different relationship status or whatever,
Yeah.
like it should still break your heart because you're still leaving kids in really untenable situations regardless of how great blended families can be. And I think they can be. I mean, I have tons of friends who have blended families and they found ways to make it work. The ones that I find work the most are the ones that there's still respect among the parents. There's still, man, I wish we could have figured this out. We just didn't. Versus the ones where it's like just so much divisiveness, and it's hard for me not to think that some of the social constructs we have like feed into that, right?
Yeah.
And so when you say like there's a lot of things out there trying to destroy family, like that resonates. I feel like there's some truth
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like that is a big part of my personal mission and purpose. So we talked about women and our wives and also families. So because kids are so unique and different, I think one of the biggest things that I've realized too is how powerful it is to help people increase awareness. So as I had this experience where I was at the oil refinery and I had kind of my future drawn out or saw what my default future would have looked like my eyes were opened, right? And you kind of have these little moments in life where you get bigger and bigger visions or bigger and bigger glimpses of all these different things. So I feel like for me that word awareness continues to come back. So I try to keep that perspective when I am parenting, when I'm connecting with my wife, when there's ever anything else like that. I'm like, there's probably something bigger here that I haven't even learned yet. There's probably pieces to this that I don't even know what questions to ask. And that's helped me a lot of times just not only stay humble, but realize that like it's about growing together. So there's an awesome part of that. My wife and I in our relationship, me with my kids, and each one of them and their own individual gifts and talents and all the beautiful thing that they bring to a family unit, right? Which is such a cool experience and just a blessing in and of itself to be, like you said, you don't know who's raising who some days. Like it kind of feel like, and in our church too, like that these kids like they chose us, like they're
Mhm.
here and now we get to be their guardians and they chose us,
Yeah.
so they're here for a reason. So there's absolutely stuff they're going to teach me, but there's no way I'm going to learn it and receive it if I can't kick my ego.
Yeah.
So that's the part
Yeah.
of the
I think
reason
that's
I feel with the world too is because the world pushes and pumps the ego so much that like it
it.
is inflating that part of man that suppresses our connection to spirituality. Even if you dive into things like, and I've read plenty of personal growth and development books and all this good stuff, but if you get into, you could totally get lost in that rabbit hole. You could think that you're so broken that you need to go through 100 personal development books before you're even kind of sort of, getting to a place where you're working through some stuff. Like, no, you just have things that you'll continue to grow and experience and learn. And like,
Yeah.
you be good where you're at now. And what can you do with that? And doesn't mean you can't keep getting better, but man, we so quickly diminish ourselves. And that's where the world, I think, starts to just drive this wedge and just divide and conquer mentality.
Yeah. There's so much value in that. And I think the ego piece, I mean, we could talk for hours on that because there's just so much around like I really do believe that, God created us to create, to love, and to serve. And none of that is about me.
Yep.
There's so much, but when you look at the social constructs that are out there, there's so much about my truth and getting my piece of the pie and having my experience. And it's like,
Yep. Yep.
and I'll be honest, man, I struggle with it. I think you do a better job than I do. And I really admire the way that you love on your family and you love on your wife. And I know you have days where it's dark and you struggle. And I know that, the gym and working out and physically moving is one of the ways that you can resolve that. I tend to be much more insecure, and I tend to really fall into this darkness around, like, life isn't fair, things aren't cool, I don't ever get my peace. And it's just such bullshit because it's not true. I mean, I'm so blessed. But so, and like so one of the things that has helped me tremendously in moving out of that is being able to serve, being able to mentor, coach, share what I know. Because like you said earlier, it didn't come out of thin air. Like, it's come through the struggle. It's come through having to figure it out, come through going, okay, this isn't what I want. I want, like, my dad was married 3 times. My wife and I just celebrated our 23rd wedding anniversary. I'm like, we're
Awesome.
committed. We are not, like, and so one of the ways that I do that is through this podcast. It's through writing my book. Um, and it's just putting the message out there and putting the information out there. And I know that means a lot to you. And I'm super grateful that you invited me to be a part of the men's community that you're, striving to build. And so I just kind of want to wrap up talking about REYL Men, what that looks like for you, what the goal is there. I want to invite the people who are listening to join into that. And so maybe share a little bit about how all of this life experience and this forefront thought about legacy has sort of led you to this organization and what that all looks like for you.
Cool. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And my motto in the family realm, to put a little tagline on that to wrap that up, is embrace the crazy. Like, it's gonna be nuts. It's gonna be messy. It's not gonna be perfect.
Yep.
So embrace the crazy, and that helps me so many days, man. But
Organized
don't
chaos.
don't undervalue yourself there, man. I know the work you've done. I know what you continue to do and how you show up. So that's amazing. I'm blessed to know you, and I learn stuff from you all the time.
Well, I appreciate it.
Growing up with one sister, my desire was always to have brothers. Like, I was always excited to have. I've had a few male cousins, and I'm like, oh, maybe sometimes they were great role models. Maybe other times, they're teaching me what not to do. I had different people around me. Always had uncles that would show me some cool things, and if there was a sport I was interested, maybe they'd help me a little bit. And different, like, it was cool that I had these other influences. But as I learned, and just like what I mentioned a few minutes ago, like, increasing my awareness, what does that matter if I can't do something with it? And what are the things that most likely are going to knock me off the train or knock me off the path as I try to go forward and do some of these hard things? So the blessing and the exciting thing about us connecting is it's been years now that we've been connected in this accountability, partnership, and connection and relationship. And I realized that the hardest things that I've pressed through in my life have also been the times that I have had the most number of accountability partners or mentors or people in my life. Like, there was one time that it was close to 8, maybe 9. I'm like, wow, like, am I that messed up? Well, okay, that would be coming from the world. Or is it what I'm about to do is that great that God's given me such a strong team around me that I'm so excited to see what comes out of this. Like, man, I'm going to grow. I can't fail. Look at this group around me. So the accountability piece is super, super amazing, because if we stick on that path and we continue to press forward, like, now all we have to do is get into action. So this group and what we're doing in REYL Men is we're working to create a brotherhood of people that are either frustrated with where they're at, in a transition, want to change, or have gone through some really hard stuff and want to circle that back. Just like you talked about the guy that authored that book about the public school system. He's got all this perspective and knowledge, and he's like, man, if there's a dad just starting out right down their family, there's probably some wisdom that they should gain. There's some things that I can share. Like, why would we not help compress his learning curve so that he can be an even better father and even better? So this is coming from both avenues, people that are in a spot that want to change, and people that you would call mentors, right? Because it's men in the group. So mentors, so mentors that are giving back and giving of their time and talents to be able to help people move it forward in whatever direction serves them best. So the group is REYL Men, REYL MEN, and it stands for Recommit Every Day You Live. And I have found, especially lately, through the COVID mess, through everything else, that has become more relevant than it's ever been in my life, to constantly recommit. And there were times where month to month, I'm like, oh yeah, that was kind of a good month, or that month was a little bit better. Daily, like the need has now become daily. Like I've got to, and sometimes within the day, hourly, like the need to recommit, because the forces that work on us, whether from the world, whether different things, whether it's our own self-doubting voice, like it is growing, and that is getting louder. So if that is getting louder, then we've got to dial in our focus and get that much stronger as well. So this is simply a journey, an invitation to a brotherhood. It's for men, obviously, adult men. And I really do a lot of our content. It's totally family friendly. So if you've got very mature teenagers that want to learn and be inspired, and like, plug them in. But typically it's, adult men, so 18 and up. And we're growing a group of men that really care about other people, that care about positively supporting the other men in the group, and want to grow themselves, have some goals and aspirations to grow into some awesome places, but also like that best version of themselves, what we call the real you, just the best version, the highest version of yourself. So that's
Yeah, it's an amazing community, and I'm super grateful to be a part of it. And I know a lot of the guys that are in it, and there's a lot of guys in it that I don't know. And as we've been going down this road the last few months, I've been able to connect with some guys. I've had the opportunity to mentor a few through, challenging and difficult times. And, a lot of it is just, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to get vulnerable. And it's really just like following other guys' leads, and being willing to just engage and listen. And what I love about it is, for the longest time, I wasn't sure how to mentor or coach. And, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've learned, someone had told me a long time ago, like, your mess with age becomes your message. And there's just so much truth in that, because there's not a lot of problems that someone has brought up with me that I'm not able to go, yeah, I've been through that. Or maybe I've not been through that, but I've felt the things that you're feeling. My circumstances were different, but I felt shame, I felt guilt, I felt less than. And so you don't even have to have, like, I've not been divorced, but I've certainly not been a great husband. And so I know what that feels like. And I know how that, and I've dropped the ball. I mean, I had to apologize to my son last night because he just caught the tail end of a day's worth of BS.
Yeah.
And I blew up at him over something small. And where, 5 years ago, I would have went and apologized to him 2 weeks later. I apologized to him 20 minutes later, because it was like, I didn't have to struggle with, like, do I apologize? Do I not? Will I look weak? It was like, no, he didn't deserve my wrath because I had a bad day. Right. And those are the kinds of things that I've learned through this type of community that you're building. And I just really want people to know, like, there's a ton of value in it, and it doesn't cause it. Is it inexpensive? I'm not even sure where that's landed right now, but like, to join the community and get access,
it's absolutely free, just to get in and get access to everything that we do, like in the moment. Present time is completely free. We will have some things that you'll be able to tap into, past recordings and different things for a nominal fee down the road, just getting some of those dialed in. But no, the group is free. We don't want to limit any part of a guy getting in and wanting to connect, to have access. That'll get you access to all the updates on the events. We do an event once a month, a live webinar once a month that spans so many different fun topics, but all of them fall within the 5 peaks. So they're either going to be focused on emotional, spiritual, financial, mental, physical, any of those 5 peaks that we focus on in REYL. You're going to get a themed event, for something about that. We're bringing in special guests and just some really fun things. And then we do a mastermind once a quarter where we dive deeper into one of those peaks. So typically in the fall, we do emotional, and beginning of the year, Q1, we do physical, followed by, the others that we've got planned throughout the year. So we kind of just run that fun cycle throughout the year, which is great to be able to have that deeper dive. And that's where some of the accountability comes in as well. Guys that really want to work in that specific peak at that specific time, they can create some smaller groups of accountability and learning and connecting with great mentors like you, and helping them move through some of that. So it's been exciting to see that show up. And the big vision for it is to actually start next year in 2022 having retreats. So we've got our first one planned for March, and we'll continue to move those forward and have those maybe in a specific location. And then the goal will be to grow them regionally as people and leaders and mentors show up to be able to host or have one maybe in their area, in their arena, and to really support guys geographically to build strong brotherhoods locally. So you've got your support system online. Yeah, that's cool. But like, who's in your backyard? Your backyard brotherhood is going to grow as well.
Yeah, it's so important. Like, I mean, I know we're slow getting back to in-person events and face-to-face community and stuff like that. And, I appreciate the caution that people are taking, and, circle back on the mental health piece, man. People have got to get together. Like, I mean, we were able to see each other in person recently because, we live in 2 different states, and just the ability to just have a conversation and break bread with somebody strengthens the community so much more. And I know that there are concerns. I know that there are things that people are trying to be cautious of and aware of. And I feel like in our reaction to fear, we have allowed mental health this last 18 months to just be kind of pushed to the wayside. And I don't think that the conversations around that have been loud enough or had enough. And so, for those of you that are listening, if you're looking for a community, if you're looking for a group that you can tap into, it's a super non-judgmental, super free space to share and to talk and to engage and to really, run it out and see what, because if you sit back over the weekend and you think about, what your next 5, 10, 15 years looks like, if you don't change something, most likely you're going to recognize areas you need improvement on. And I wouldn't suggest that REYL Men is the solution, but I 100% believe it can be a really healthy part of a solution. So, man, I just appreciate your time and putting this together. And I know you got things to do and kids to love on and places to be. So we'll wrap up here and just, I'll put in the show notes and on the website the links so they can find you and find all that stuff, and Instagram and all that. And
awesome.
I can't
Always
wait to
pleasure, man.
do more stuff with you.
Absolutely.
Cool. Appreciate you, man.
Anytime.